Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, October 1st, 2025. Professor Glenn Diesen joining us today from Sochi, Russia on the Black Sea. Professor Diesen, welcome here. Thank you for taking the time to visit us. I guess it's the middle of the night where you are, but much appreciated. You know, President Trump has purported to pass on to the Europeans the obligation for funding the Ukrainian war. He's done that in a variety of ways, directly and indirectly. Before we get to that, yesterday he purported to enter into an agreement to bring about peace in Gaza. It's not an agreement that the Gazans, the Palestinians, or the Hamas people have agreed to. In fact, it's not one that they are free to disagree to, or the war will obliterate them. But whatever the agreement was, as soon as Prime Minister Netanyahu got home, in Hebrew, he repudiated two important parts of it. One, that the IDF would not leave the Gaza Strip, and two, that the Palestinians would never have their own state, even though the agreement contemplates a state in 5 years and an immediate withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza. Does any of this surprise you?
No, it seems like a terrible deal. It's pretty much asking for Hamas and all the Palestinians in general to capitulate. And as you said, the Israelis are already looking at how they can get their obligations removed from this. But there's a lot of other components which are very concerning. There's a discussion of a peace board. In other words, there should be some external governance of the Palestinians. Apparently, this is to be led by Tony Blair. I'm not sure if they've walked away from this, but this is quite extraordinary. Of all the people in the world, this will be, one of the few which you would not put in this position after having hundreds of thousands of Arab lives on his conscience.
Before we get to Tony Blair, here is Prime Minister Netanyahu. As soon as he landed in Israel, in Hebrew, very subtly, but you can hear it, rejecting these two key components of the so-called agreement that Trump and his advisor, Steve Witkoff, have gotten some Arab countries to agree to. And the two components are the departure of the IDF and the acceptance of a Palestinian state. Chris, cut number 23.
Instead of Hamas isolating us, we turned the tables and isolated Hamas. Now the whole world, including the Arab and Muslim world, is pressuring Hamas to accept the conditions we set together with President Trump to release all our hostages, both the living and the fallen. While the IDF remains in most of the Gaza Strip, who would have believed this? After all, everyone kept saying you have to accept Hamas's terms to withdraw everyone. The IDF needs to withdraw, and Hamas can recover and also rehabilitate the Strip. No way, that's not happening. On the contrary. And President Trump added that if Hamas refuses, he will give Israel full backing to complete the military operation to eliminate it. And that's why I think, from every perspective, this was an excellent visit.
Many in the government, there's a question being asked. Did you agree to a Palestinian state?
Absolutely not. It's also not written in the agreement. But one thing we did say is that we will strongly oppose a Palestinian state. President Trump also said that. He said he understands that. He also said at the UN that it would be a huge reward for terror and a danger to the state of Israel.
The so-called agreement, which of course has not been accepted by Hamas, so I don't know how you can call it an agreement. It has been accepted by some of the Arab countries in the region. Does provide for, the New York Times printed it, and I'm sure you read it, does provide for the IDF to withdraw to the borders of the Gaza Strip, but outside the Gaza Strip, and it does contemplate a Palestinian state in the next 5 years. Now, that'll never happen with Tony Blair there, but we'll get to Prime Minister Blair in a minute. How can he shake hands with Donald Trump and in the same day repudiate what he just shook hands on?
Well, there's no consequences, I think. I mean, if now Trump obviously watches this video, finds out that he's rejecting everything he just agreed to, what will Trump do? I mean, he bends over backwards for Netanyahu. So this is what Netanyahu walks around the Middle East bragging about, that they can make the Americans do anything. So I don't think there would be many consequences. But this is a key problem why it would be very difficult for the Palestinians to accept any such a harsh deal. That is, once it's time for the Israelis to do their part, what happens when Israel walks away? If this is a deal which is being monitored by Israel, the United States, and UK, I mean, these are the main three countries carrying out the genocide, and they are the ones who are going to make sure that that all sides live up to the agreement. You can see that this isn't going to go anywhere. The fact that he already has to reassure his own population and his own audience that this is never going to happen, it should be enough to make the Palestinians reject this.
Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who was the chief of staff in the State Department at the time, says that nobody except for Vice President Cheney was more aggressive and fanatical about pursuing the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq than Tony Blair. Why would the Arabs agree, and why would the neighboring Arabs, and why would the Palestinians agree to a neo-colonial form of government with Tony Blair as the Governor General?
Well, God knows. A lot of the conflicts which continue to ravage the Middle East derive from the invasion of Iraq. So the fact that you would get the main culprit, one of the main culprits, back and put him back into the game and have him, manage Gaza, it's just it's hard to believe. It's like it would be a parody, but one gets the impression that it's almost something they just added to it just to make sure that Hamas could never accept this deal. I mean, as he suggested now, Netanyahu, he did say more or less quite openly that people used to put pressure on Israel. Now they're saying that it's Hamas who will begin to reject this deal. In other words, Israel is for peace, Hamas is not. I mean, we had the same problem in Ukraine. That is, after more than 3 years of the Ukrainians and the Europeans boycotting all diplomacy, even banning it, they had to change the narrative. That it's the Russians who didn't want diplomacy. They always wanted it. So you come up with these conditions like an unconditional ceasefire, or, well, before we even start to resolve anything, Putin has to meet Zelensky. All these things which can't happen. And then you get to, the media can jump on it, they can spin it, and now suddenly it's Netanyahu who really just wants peace, but it's Hamas who refuses it. So it's also a war of narratives.
So will the former principal occupant of number 10 Downing Street, a truly opulent residence in London, now live in Gaza City? If he's going to be the Governor General of Gaza, I mean, I can't imagine that.
Well, I can't imagine him wanting to live among the people he's ruling over anyway. So I think, I mean, how is this different from the 19th century colonial rule? I mean, this is not the people who have your best at heart. Well, why not get the actual United Nations in, or if you need someone to administer it, and the Palestinians are not allowed to govern themselves, why not get a neutral country, one that's not involved? There's plenty of options out there. But of all the countries in the world, you go for Britain, and of all the British, you're going to go for Tony Blair. It's quite unbelievable.
Yesterday, the alternative media, not the mainstream media, has reported that the captain of one of the boats in the Gaza aid flotilla has been seized and kidnapped by the Israelis. Doesn't the President of the United States have a heart? Doesn't he understand how starving these people are, and how his buddy Netanyahu is perpetuating the starvation? Are the Americans just going to allow, the captain's an American, by the way, are the American State Department just going to allow this to happen?
Seemingly so, but what you touch upon is quite important, because the whole narrative has been lost. I mean, after the horrific September 11 attacks, there was a new effort to reshape the world, as good guys versus bad guys. That is the civilized liberal democracies versus the terrorists. And this kind of was a good way of selling all interventions and wars. So to, well, essentially do whatever one would want to do in the region. But if you forward now, jump ahead 24 years, it's us who are, supporting a genocide in Gaza. We're backing an Al-Qaeda leader in Syria, and now, of course, stopping flotillas, kidnapping people who want to give formula to babies. I mean, it's very hard to still sell this argument that we are necessarily the good guys now fighting the bad guys.
I don't want to drag you into American domestic politics, but I have to ask you this about Europe. The U.S. is embroiled right now over this issue of American military troops in the streets in major cities for law enforcement purposes. Does this happen in Europe? Do European troops in attack garb and with automatic weapons appear in the streets engaging in ordinary law enforcement? I realize the history, the law, the Constitution, the culture is all very different from America, but I just want to know if this happens anywhere else in the Western world.
But no, it's not. But America always tends to be a bit ahead of us. So we do tend to emulate America, both the good and the bad, unfortunately. So, but this is, it's an old truism that the empire essentially comes back to haunt you. That is the instrument one uses abroad, the military tactics. Eventually this can come back and be used against one's own population. I know in the United States, it's literally the same weapons, because a lot of the weapons and military equipment, which has been used in wars abroad, can be used home by the police, sold. So this is why police forces sometimes come dressed up like they're ready to do to invade. But it is quite unfortunate. It risks breaking the social contract between the public and its people. And what is strange about, United States, I know the gun laws and all are a lot more liberal than what you would find anywhere in Europe. But it's also true that the United States has a much stronger liberal foundation in terms of being protected by the law, having constitution, and to see the individual freedoms. This is we claim these are also European values, but we import it more from the United States. These are good values. But they seem to be stepped upon here. So it is a bit surprising that in the US, if you can't keep up your individual freedoms over there, I don't think it's much hopes for the Europeans down the road.
Yesterday, the President of the United States addressed theoretically every general officer and admiral in the United States military, as well as their chief non-commissioned officer. There were about 800 people in the audience. And he actually made a comment that was very terrifying, which I'll play for you now, suggesting that the American military could train or practice its work in American cities. Chris?
San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within. Controlling the physical territory of our border is essential to national security. We can't let these people in. We're under invasion from within. No different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. At least when they're wearing a uniform, you can take them out. These people don't have uniforms. I told Pete, we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
Would the European governments use major cities, Brussels, London, Paris, Berlin, as training grounds for the military?
Well, not their own cities. This is quite extraordinary that you can say this and get away with it. Now, I would think that in terms of having a large immigration problem, I think using the military to patrol the borders, I think that would be defensible. I wouldn't see anything awful about this. Indeed, it's the responsibility of a country to guard its own borders. So when Trump used to say, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country, fair enough. I'm pretty much on board with this. But the problem is when you refer to illegal migrants who are inside the country and you treat them as invaders, to say that they have invaded the country, and then you use the military lingo, that is, they're not wearing uniforms, but it's still an invasion. No, it's clearly not. I mean, the words do matter. They are illegal immigrants. They can be deported, of course. They're not there legally, but to use this military terms, it's very dangerous, because once you frame it as effectively enemy combatants not wearing uniforms, this legitimizes a military response, and you can use the example of Venezuela as an example. Now, the argument is that the Venezuelans are invading the United States, but it's the U.S. who put crippling sanctions on Venezuela. It causes social havoc within the country, and a lot of people are fleeing and seeking refuge in the United States. Now, there's ways to solve this, but calling it a Venezuelan invasion and go for, using this as a way, for example, to attack Venezuela, it doesn't make any sense. This is only going to bring more people. So words do matter, and I fear that Donald Trump's framing of this as an invasion by people not wearing uniform, as I said, this will be used to legitimize a military response, that is, military force against America's own public. Again, as someone who always admired America's focus on individual freedoms and key principles, it's kind of heartbreaking to watch.
It is very heartbreaking and demoralizing. The two speeches yesterday were preening performances of political claptrap, and I don't think it went over very well with the generals. We'll be talking to Colonel Wilkerson about this in the next hour. In your travels in Russia and your finger on the pulse of things Russian from your university perch in Europe, do you get the feeling that Russian elites are getting impatient with the war still going on and on and on in Ukraine?
Yeah, and I do think that it's the further they get into this war, and the more Ukraine gets weakened, the more the Europeans, well, also the Americans, but now it's more the Europeans, are escalating. So there seems to be a sentiment that as Ukraine now gets weaker and the Europeans prepare to escalate, Russia is in a position where it can respond more forcefully, because again, the Europeans, at least a few years ago, they were suggesting that they weren't party of the conflict. Now you have people like Ben Wallace, who was arguing that we have to strangle Crimea, make it unlivable. We have to get these tomahawks, and we will help you with the targeting and the planning. This, we are at war with Russia now. The pretense is more or less gone. So it's the weapons are more powerful. The rhetoric has changed. So at some point, Russia always had this dilemma: do they strike back at NATO, but then risk World War III, or they do nothing and then embolden NATO to escalate further, cross more red lines? So I think now that Ukraine seems to be on its last leg, and the Europeans are escalating further, while the Americans seem a bit lukewarm on the whole issue, I think that they could begin to change their tactics, because there's a certain anger. Just to add very quickly, this conference I'm at now, it's called the Valdai Discussion Club. It's gone on for 22 years. I've been here the last 5 or 6 years. You feel the rhetoric and sentiments changing. And if I would put in 2022, I would put concerned, because it's in around October, November, and then in 2023 it began much more confident. 2024 they act as if the war has already been resolved, and now in 2025 there's a lot of anger, especially towards the Europeans. So and then especially the Germans. So I'm quite concerned. we should go back to principle where security, goes into reducing security competition, diplomacy. Everyone seems determined that the security derives from simply defeating the other side, which isn't a good plan when you're fighting the world's largest nuclear power.
Are the European countries paying American arms manufacturers for the type of weaponry that the United States under President Biden was just giving to Ukraine? And if they are, well, if they aren't, that's the end of the inquiry. If they are the arms coming at the same rate as they were when the U.S. was just supplying them from our surplus?
Well, I haven't seen the lists of the weapons supplied or how they've been paid for. But NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made a comment, I think it was yesterday, that America had opened the floodgates again for weapons pouring into Ukraine.
Well,
so,
what does he mean by that? Does he mean that Trump is now doing what Biden did, or that Trump has authorized all the sales that the buyers can afford?
Yeah, it seems to be the sales. But again, the Europeans tend to speak very loud. But in reality, I don't think it can do much now, because the U.S. needs weapons for other things. They already depleted a lot of their surpluses. They're now possibly preparing for another war with Iran. So they don't have that much more to sell, and the European economies are doing very poorly. So they can't really buy these weapons, and there's not that many more Ukrainians to use the weapons because of the attrition warfare. There's been so many horrific losses, which appears to be intensifying. So I don't think it really matters much. I think Trump at this moment his main focus is simply unloading the war on the Europeans, so he can tell his own audience or his own public, I'm just selling the weapons. We get to weaken Russia and help Ukraine, but at the end of the day, it's not my war. This is what it's going to go with. The Europeans are growing very concerned, though, exactly because they know they can't fill the shoes of America. They can't simply buy all the American weapons and continue this. So the main concern for Europe now is that America's dumping the war on them, and that the war is being lost.
How did you interpret President Trump's statement that Russia is a paper tiger? Was this just dumb and ill-informed, or was this part of a strategy perhaps to goad Russia into accelerating the war to get it over with sooner?
I'm still on the fence about Trump. It's hard to position him because
you and 99% of the American public.
Well, I kind of tend to operate with two different theses. One is that he's kind of been, lured into the war hawks. That is, he's not that much more different. He simply wants the Europeans to carry a heavier load, but this is more or less a new division of labor, that the Europeans focus on killing Russians and America can focus other places. So again, they still continue the war, but under America first. My second hypothesis, which I often tend to lean to, but not always, is that he has to manage a very hostile political class at home. That is what he's doing in terms of trying to end the war and improve bilateral relations with Russia. It's not necessarily very popular among the political class in Washington. So he finds these things he can do. He can call Russia paper tiger. You can conquer all of Ukraine and get all the territory back. And why not take some Russia at the same time? They're taking, huge losses, and their economy is weak. They're paper tiger. All of this stuff. I mean, all the hawks will applaud, but then at the end of the day, they end up asking, well, where's the crushing sanctions? And he says, well, the Europeans have to do it first, shoot down the Russian planes, but that's Europe's responsibility. We don't want to get involved. So it could just be empty words. So he talk a big game, and then he doesn't really have to follow it up with policy. And I'm hoping this is what he's doing. Otherwise, we're looking at World War III.
Last question. You will be in the audience tomorrow when President Putin speaks. What do you expect to hear from him?
Well, a key theme here at the conference has been multipolarity. That is, the optimism, because I was here last year as well after Trump had been elected, and that was a big thing because they were optimistic. A lot of the optimism that they would find a partner in Trump, someone who could help them end the war, is almost gone. They don't feel that Trump actually did anything. I spoke to Sergei Lavrov yesterday as well. I asked him as well, why are you negotiating? Why is Trump and simply trying to push the Russians and Ukrainians together? Surely, if the foundation of a peace agreement is to stop NATO expansion, you don't really need Ukraine for this. Indeed, making Russia pressure the Ukrainians into this a near impossible thing to do is almost cruel. Surely this could be done with a bilateral agreement, but again, they don't want to talk. Don't want to tell what they're talking about behind closed doors with the Americans. So he kind of,
right.
evaded a bit. But I think Trump.
Do let us know if President Putin says anything that doesn't make its way to the Western press. Safe travels. Thank you for joining us. I know it's the middle of the night where you are. Thank you so much for accommodating my schedule. All the best, Professor Diesen. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming up for the remainder of the day at 2 o'clock, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. At 3 o'clock, Phil Giraldi. At 4 o'clock, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.